I wanted for us to start with, just to think about is, what was the best advice that you've been given?
Hmm.
Really? You want me to share what my dad told me?
Well, maybe let's start with Brad.
I once had a boss who told me, uh, don't criticize unless you can come in with a recommendation. And I think
Hmm.
that's great advice.
Meaning like have an opinion on something?
No, don't just criticize that something is wrong
Right.
without coming in with a recommendation on how to make it better.
Got it. So don't just be critical, be productive and constructive. Nice.
I would say that mine is similar to Brad's in that don't I guess criticize would be the right word unless you've seen the situation that you're commenting on.
Mm-hmm. Great. What else? Anything else? Yeah, Ben?
I apologize. I was just finishing my lunch, my bag of peanuts. But I think the best advice I ever got, I mean, it's somewhat simplistic, but it was hard work is very rewarding.
Got it. Anybody else? Rebecca, it sounded like you had you had some maybe PG-13 advice or something. Okay. So sometimes that's how it comes across. Anybody else? Sorry, Rebecca.
My dad told me that relationships break up for three reasons. It's either the sex, the money, or the kids.
There you go. So that wasn't inappropriate. Anybody else want to share?
Hmm.
I think the best advice I got from a mentor once was essentially there's always the excuse of being busy, but at the end of the day, you prioritize the things that are priority. And that was a helpful way to, there's always the excuse that you're busy. But if it matters, you make it happen. And if you don't, it doesn't. All right, great. So even if you didn't share, I can see all of you thinking, right? Thinking back to advice that you've been given over the years. So the text that we're going to look at today is not the Torah portion this week, but we're going to look at Kohelet, or better known as Ecclesiastes, which is the Haftarah, the scroll that goes with Sukkot. So it's the same way how you'll read, like Esther during Purim, we read Song of Songs during Passover. During Sukkot, we read Ecclesiastes or Kohelet. So this is a kind of known text. I'm not sure if y'all you may or may not have encountered it before. The most commonly known section is there's a time for everything, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to reap, sow, to all those things, right? So that's sort of the most famous section of Kohelet. But it's an interesting text to look at during Sukkot because it gets to not the sort of under the surface themes of Sukkot, right? So the main themes of Sukkot are harvest, joy, being out in nature, celebrating with family, appreciating the blessings that you have. It's also commemorating the journey through the wilderness as the Israelites were in their temporary tents moving around. But underneath that is also themes of fragility and impermanence. So sort of the flip side where we get to the gratitude is really thinking of, I have this thing. What if I didn't have this thing? So when we think about a time of a harvest time back in, agricultural, think in the ancient land of Israel and agricultural times, you plant and you harvest in the fall. If you don't have a good crop, you and your family may not make it through the winter. So there's this real urgency and recognition that, things may be out of my control and may not work out. So therefore, we appreciate what we have. We have gratitude for what we have. And we also sort of recognize and make peace with the lack of control we have over some things in our life. So altogether, that's kind of where Sukkot is coming from thematically. So Kohelet is more on those themes of impermanence, of sort of like the challenges and also joys of life, and how do we make sense of it all. So Kohelet is a sort of second, third, fourth century BCE, what we would call Jewish wisdom text. So it's about, let's call it 2,400 years old. And it's a wisdom text, meaning that it is trying to communicate wisdom. It's sort of understood to be some kind of speaker, some kind of writer. Some people attribute it to King David at a later stage in his life, sort of looking back and trying to make sense of all it is that he's seen in his life. And then what does he then have to share with others? So that's sort of the basis of what Kohelet is all about. And he has an interesting tone, so I'll be curious to get your opinions as well about what we make of his. It's not just content, but the delivery. And the questions that I want us to sort of explore as we look through the text is what is Kohelet is sort of considered like the speaker. Kohelet means like leader of the assembly, so some kind of communal leader of in the Jewish community. So what matters to him, and what do we think, like what matters to him, and do we agree with him about his perspective and what matters, and why is he talking about things in this way? All right, any question? I just spit a lot of information at you. Any questions so far? All right, great. I'm going to pull up whoops, that's not the right thing. Second. All right. Can you all see to the text, or should I zoom in a little? Seems fine. Okay, great. So we're going to start. This is the opening of the book of Kohelet. This is where we're introduced to the author, to the speaker, and he starts. This sort of gives like a summary of everything else he's going to cover in the next 11 chapters of the scroll. Would someone like to read for us?
Okay.
Okay, go for it.
The words of Kohelet, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Futility, or utter futility, said Kohelet. Utter futility. All is futile. What real value is there for a man in all the gains he makes beneath the sun? One generation goes, another comes, but the earth remains the same forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and glides back to where it rises.
Keep going.
Southward blowing, turning northward, ever turning blows the wind. On its rounds, the wind returns. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place from which they flow, the streams flow back again. All such things are wearisome. No man can ever state them. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear enough of hearing. Only that shall happen which has happened. Only that occur which has occurred. There is nothing new beneath the sun.
We keep going.
Sometimes there is a phenomenon of which they say, look, this one is new. It occurred long since in ages that went by before us. The earlier ones are not remembered. So too, those that will occur later will no more be remembered than those that will occur at the very end.
All right, great. So what on earth is this guy saying? Also, I think I said I had attributed to David. It's Solomon who's meant to be who's traditionally the author, but probably historically, probably not. So what is he talking about? Yeah, Ben?
Thank you, Rabbi. I read this, read through this with Jonathan. I think it's sort of interesting in comparison to today and climate change, where for thousands of years we did have this view that the Earth's never going to change, sunrise and sunset, but the water floats in the ocean and never changes, and the ground never changes. But today we know that this is really not so true, with the changing of rising levels in the ocean and the Earth being kind of whatever changing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do we think he's talking like literally or more?
Well, of course, this is the
Just
Torah, so I'm not taking it literally, but
yeah.
yes, of course, but to put that lens on my interpretation of this, it gives me some thought.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So let's start first with like, I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear everyone's thoughts on things. But let's kind of talk through first. What is he talking about? What is he saying? What is his perspective? What's he communicating to us? Rebecca?
That generations come and go, and we never seem to learn the lessons. So, for instance, history repeats itself, right?
Mm-hmm. History repeats itself. Things that are learned or forgotten. People who were important in one generation are forgotten, and time just keeps cycling through. Okay, great. Merle?
Well, yeah, what Rebecca just said, when we watch what our children or grandchildren are doing, or friends, kids, or whatever, we sit there and say, "Oh, that all looks familiar. I've been there, done that." Like whatever information I'm giving you really isn't new material. It's happened before.
Right, that there's nothing, and that's kind of what he's saying, there's nothing new under the sun. Everything that we think we're producing that's new and innovative and revolutionary was all there in some kind of way before. Which is both, there's an optimistic way to look at it and there's a pessimistic way to look at it, right? One is there are things that are eternal, that can give kind of comfort to and are stabilizing. Or it makes us feel like what we're doing is a little futile.
Le plus ça change, le plus c'est la même chose, right? The more things change, the more things stay the same.
Exactly. Brad, you have your hand raised?
Well, I'm sort of repeating what's been said, but that there's no permanency, that everything is transitory in nature.
Right? Nothing is permanent.
But isn't that weird though, that he is saying that there's always a new person, there's always a new river, there's always a new wind pattern, there's always a new something going on, but it's always the same one that happened before, So interesting.
Right. It's both old and new at the same time, right? It's a new person, it's a new human being who's come into the world, but we keep following into the same patterns. Right. So Mara, you want to say something?
Yes, I used to hate this because it seems so pessimistic, and it still kind of does, but it also, I like what you said, it also has some optimism too, that things will go on. And it says very famous statements in here. And when you said the old and the new, I thought of Alta Neuland, Tel Aviv, Israel, was old and it is now new, but it's a changed new. I mean, I hadn't thought of that before till I heard you say now old and new. And this also seems like it's written, if it's written, I mean, it was attributed to Solomon, but why? It wasn't Solomon as a young man singing the Song of Songs. It was Solomon, perhaps close to his deathbed or so. Because I think it's well, it's a mature look. It's an old age look too.
Yeah, absolutely right. So it's attributed to Solomon, and the thinking is that Solomon wrote Song of Songs as a youth, right? A young man in love and filled with vigor and adventure. And then by the end of his life had a more mature and you know, a different perspective. Mary, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I'm struck by the line at the end that says, "For as wisdom grows, vexation grows." And it strikes me that this can suggest to us that
Mm.
it's not through wisdom that we can understand what we're seeing, and thus perhaps things do change, but because we only seek to understand them through reason, as opposed to other ways of understanding, that we see that there's no change.
Mm. Right. When we try to understand things with more perspective and more learning and all of that, the more we end up getting frustrated.
And our ability, we literally cannot understand everything through reason. If we could, and that's why we continue to try and understand God and can't fully do so.
Right. Exactly. Right. The more you try to understand about the universe, the less we know that the better we understand that we don't understand much. Which is, as he's describing it, is a vexation, right? Is a frustration. Why can't I master this all? Why can't I get it all? And we'll see as we kind of go through the text a little bit more, his perspective. I think his perspective, like maybe doesn't change, but I think he kind of explains a little bit more why he's saying what he's saying. The last thing I want to highlight before we move on is a line here up at the top that gets translated a bunch of different ways. So this here it says, utter futility, said Kohelet, utter futility, all is futile. So the kind of classical translation of this is vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And it's interesting because it's a tricky word to translate. So if we go up to the Hebrew, it says Hal Havelim, Hakol Havel. So Havel here is like this idea. It's sort of like it's like this ether. It's like steam. It's mist. It's something that as soon is fleeting. As soon as I go to grab it, right, it escapes through my hands. Right. So imagine, all the mist we've had in LA the last couple of weeks, right? You're outside in it and you try to grab it and it seems so real and it's right there. But as soon as you try to take it, it slips through your fingers. Yeah, Brad?
Yeah, the Romans took that over and called it vanitas vanitatem. But also this makes me think of the Greek philosopher Heraclitus, who famously said, you cannot step into the same stream twice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's the same message.
Yes. Right. This idea of, right, like you might think you're in the same one. You might think, and actually that connection right there is one of the reasons why people might argue for a Greek, like a sort of Hellenistic influence on the author of Kohelet. That, right, this idea that like the rivers keep circling and keep going around and around, and I might be walking to the exact same spot, but it's different water, it's a different riverbed, it's different pebbles, it's different fish, right? It might seem to us to be the same, but it's constantly turning. And as soon as we try to contain it, it escapes us, right? So this is sort of, this kind of is the best summary, really, right, of Kohelet. And what he's talking about is that everything that we try to get a grasp of, every time we seek stability, it evaporates. But then the underlying question then is, so if that's the case, what do we do about it? What do we think? How do we go through life? So we'll keep that our idea in mind. So let's jump down to, so we see here he talks more, he was king in Jerusalem. I set my mind to study and gain wisdom. And then I turned away from wisdom and I decided I'm just going to go grow rich and I'm going to get all of these things. But it turns out all of that was still folly and madness itself. All right, so let's look a little bit. Let's go to chapter 2. Does someone want to read this next part? Again, we're asking the question of like, what matters to the author here? And then what do we make of that?
So I have one question. Which word did you say was the futility in Hebrew? There was
Havel.
Havel?
Havel. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then some of it now it goes positive and negative because we just skipped over. Oh, I got rich, and he tells how wealthy he was, how much. So some of it is like you can't take it with you. When you.
Well, we're gonna read some more. We got to read some more of it. We got to see what he's saying.
So some of that is a wisdom kind of a thing, and don't revel in how many things you have, and how.
Well, maybe yes, maybe no. He's gonna talk some more about it. We gotta check out the text.
Yeah, okay. So I read it here. I said to myself, come, I will treat you to merriment. Taste mirth. That too I found was futile. Of revelry, I said, it's mad. Of merriment, what good is that? I ventured to tempt my flesh with wine and to grasp folly, while letting my mind direct with wisdom, to the end that I might learn which of the two was better for men to practice in their few days of life under heaven. So I multiplied my possessions. I built myself, here, we're coming to it, myself houses, and I planted vineyards. I laid out gardens and groves in which I planted every kind of fruit. I further amassed silver and gold and treasures of kings and provinces. And I got myself male and female singers, as well as the luxuries of commoners, coffers and coffers of them. Thus I gained more wealth than anyone before me in Jerusalem. In addition, my wisdom remained with me. I withheld from my eyes nothing they asked for and denied myself no enjoyment. Rather, I got enjoyment out of all my wealth, and that was all I got out of my wealth. Then my thoughts turned to all the fortune my hands had built up, to the wealth I had acquired and won. And it was all futile in pursuit of wind. There was no real value under the sun. For what will the man be like who will succeed the one who is ruling over what was built up long ago? My thoughts also turned to appraising wisdom and madness and folly, and I found that wisdom is superior to folly. As light is superior to darkness, a wise man has his eyes in his head, whereas a fool walks in darkness. But I also realized that the same fate awaits them both. That's right. So I reflected. The fate of the fool is always denied from me. To what advantage, then, have I been wise? And I came to the conclusion that too was futile, because the wise man, just like the fool, is not remembered forever. For as the succeeding days roll by, both are forgotten. Alas, the wise man dies just like the fool. And so I loathed my life, for I was distressed by all that goes on under the sun, because everything is futile in pursuit of wind. So too I loathed all the wealth that I was gaining under the sun, but I shall leave it to the man who will succeed me, and who knows whether he will be wise or foolish. And he will control all the wealth that I gained by toil and wisdom under the sun. That too is futile. And so I came to view with despair all the gains I had made under the sun.
Great. So I'm sure we all feel very uplifted now.
Yeah, right.
So what is he saying here? What's his thesis about his life?
Well, he says all comes to naught, but that everyone's going to die. That's just that he knows, and he's coming close to it, because this is not written by a kid. It's looking retrospectively. So maybe then the next thing after this is so depressing is that, because I always thought, why is this at Sukkot? Because you may as well eat now and enjoy life while you can, because it's not going to last forever.
Right, exactly. So we were talking about that this Kohelet really connects with the themes of fragility and sort of gratitude for what it is, knowing that it didn't have to be. Right. And so he's saying, he's like, I've done it all. I bought everything that could be bought. I had every enjoyment that could be enjoyed. And that was nice, but what is it all for, right? And I learned wisdom. I learned a bunch, and I saw all that there is to see in the world, because I knew that it would be better to be wise than be a fool, but both the wise and the fools die, right? Not a fool, a wise person isn't necessarily remembered more than a fool. So what does that matter too? It's all futile. It's all pursuit of wind, right? That same idea of like this thing that you just can't grasp onto. And I think in this idea, as we were talking about, a generation comes, a generation goes, right? I amassed all this wealth, but I'm going to die, and someone else is going to benefit from the toil that I did. And now there's a way to view that like positively. And he'll get to that a little bit later. But why is it for someone else to enjoy the thing that I worked so hard to get? Right? That was mine, and all it does is go to another person. So how would we say, I'm curious what you all think, what do you think what's his tone? What's his emotional state as he's talking about all this? Merle? And then Rebecca?
I'm at a state in my life where what am I going to do with all this stuff? I mean, it might be stuff that's on a table, stuff that's in a book, stuff that's in my brain. What do I do with it all? And that's the futility part, I think.
Yeah. And I love that extra thing too, not just the stuff on the table, but like the content the perspective, all the things that you've thought and seen and grown in. What do you do with it?
Who's going to listen to you at this point?
Then that's what he's saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rebecca, you wanted to say something, and then Daphne?
It's almost like he's on an island by himself. There's no sentences or relating to other people in his life. And I say that because I can live on an island and I can be grateful and happy with all that I have. And then all of a sudden, if I come across someone that changes my direction or makes me feel bad or something, then what happens? Does that make sense what I'm saying? It seems like he's just talking about himself without any kind of interaction from whoever it happens to be in his life. That's what's confusing to me.
Yeah, that he seems kind of lonely, right? He's talking about things from a very isolated perspective. He's not saying like, what joy that I get to pass on to my children and grandchildren, all these things that I've amassed. And he's saying more like somebody else is getting all this. What was it even for? Yeah. Yeah, Daphne?
Hi. Yeah, I relate to that last comment because while I've been listening to all of this, a few things came into my mind. One of which is a line from Mel Brooks' History of the World in the part of the Roman Empire where Caesar says it's lonely at the top of Olympus. Like you can't connect and relate to people when you're in this isolated status. You can't have true relationships and true friends as king because people either serve you or are afraid of you.
Mm-hmm.
It's possible that he doesn't have the same relationships as commoners do. And so in that loneliness, he has this isolated human experience.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I immediately thought of was Sisyphus, the Greek, I don't know if it's Greek or Roman, but the idea of the constant burden and then having to repeat that over and over and over again. I roll the boulder up the mountain and I worked really hard and I achieved the success of reaching it to its destination, which could be the hard work to amass gold or the years put into Torah study and acquiring knowledge. And then what? Then I have to do it all over again. So it doesn't really matter that I did it, unless the pursuit of doing it is the goal, right? So then what is the goal? Is the goal just to try different things and to see who dies with the most toys? Or is it to experience the journey?
Yeah, and I think the questions that you're asking are exactly the same questions that the author is struggling with, right? I got to the top of the mountain. Now what? Right? And I loved what you were saying too, about, right, like that the isolation that comes with, right, like you've elevated yourself through wealth, through power, through wisdom, and then you find yourself kind of removed from people. So what was the point of accumulating all of these things that should be worthwhile things to accumulate, if it also didn't lead to other things, right? And I think at this
thought I wondered if there's some kind of disappointment in human nature. Like we work so hard to attain knowledge, like we're imperfect, and then we spend our lives working towards a goal to fix something that's imperfect, to be better at our jobs, to be more wise. And then it doesn't result in something material. And then the next generation has to go through the same efforts again. So we're not really improving on ourselves, even though I disagree with that, because I think everything that we do builds on itself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's part of the questions that, like, again, I think, so at this part of the text, the author is asking more questions than he's giving answers, right? Because he's struggling with these same questions of like, what does it all mean? Why are we here? Here's like, he's laying out here's the observations I've made over the last, let's say 75 years. And here's what I've seen. So now what? Right?
I think the irony is that he wrote this down. I think it's likely that many people have had these same thoughts when they confront their own mortality. But if you write it down, then your words can be studied and discussed generations later, and then it was all for something.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that it's ironic. I think it's meant to be helpful, right? I think sometimes, like, even for us, like I like asking the question of like, why do we, for Jewish texts, right? Why is it that we've preserved these sources for thousands of years? And I think something like Kohelet, for the times when we as human beings, because we get to a place where we start wondering, what's this all about and what's this all for? And I think, it's a reminder you're not alone in trying to figure it out. And B, people have been trying to work through it for a long time, and maybe there's some wisdom to be found here. But it's important to ask the questions, right? Brad?
Yeah, you asked about his mental state. I would say at this point, he's a nihilist. He sees life as being pointless.
Okay, so he's a nihilist at this point. Here, I know we don't have time to go through all the texts that I'm trying to find some good ones. Okay, so let's jump down a little bit, right? So he's a nihilist at this point, right? We're seeing him that there's nothing but sort of pessimism, and it's all, you can struggle and do all that, but it's pointless in the end. All right, so let's jump down. So this is from chapter 4, so a little bit further on in the book. Does anyone want to read? Rebecca, go for it.
And I have noted this further futility under the sun. The case of the man who is alone, with no companion, who has neither son nor brother, yet he amasses wealth without limit, and his eye is never sated with riches. For whom now is he amassing it while denying himself enjoyment? That too is futility and an unhappy business. Two are better off than one, in that they have greater benefit from their earnings. For should they fall, one can raise the other, but woe betide him who is alone and falls with no companion to raise him. Further, when two lie together, they are warm, but how can he who is alone get warm? Also, if one attacks, two can stand up to him. A threefold cord is not readily broken. Better a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king who no longer has the sense to heed warnings. For the former can emerge from a dungeon to become a king, while the latter, even if born to kingship, can become a pauper. However, I reflected about all the living who walk under the sun with that youthful successor who steps into his place. And later generations will not acclaim him either, for that too is futile and a pursuit of wind. Be not overeager to go to the house of God. More acceptable is obedience than the offering of fools, for they know nothing but to do wrong.
Great. All right, so now we're getting into a little more advice. So what is his advice here that he's giving? He gives a little bit more concrete offerings.
Well, I mean, it's a lot of, I think what Daphne was saying plays out here as well. I mean, he's confessing it himself. You know, she was sort of giving I guess there was a quote from Carl Jung, I remember, that the more a man knows, the lonelier he gets. So you can actually, she was talking about that, and you can see this right now. He's talking about the benefit of cooperation and being with others, And I think it's also sort of, we're talking about that he's quite nihilistic and quite fatalistic, but people were talking about how he doesn't really know what he has done all of his stuff for. And it really plays into kind of he knows, I think he sort of has a sense of it himself. He knows this. And so his advice then seems to be kind of a little bit of doing things in cooperation with others is sort of better than just being by yourself and knowing everything, but not being able to relate to anybody in a world where nobody listens to everybody and everything just keeps on going, no matter what everybody says, so that's kind of his experience. I think he might be saying in an offhanded way himself that, if he had more of a legacy or had more of a community, then it would have been it probably would have worked against his sense of absolute transience that he seems to be conveying before, I think.
Got it. Okay. What else do we think? I'm not so sure that he's being nihilistic here. Right? Like he definitely was before. But he's talking about community. He's talking about having at least one companion, if not a third, right? And right, that's not someone who, like, we think of people who are nihilistic have sort of said like, oh, like no one, like, right, it all comes and goes, who cares? But he's actually not. He's saying it's important to be with people and to not be on your own. That's part of what makes all of this endeavoring worthwhile. Daphne?
He doesn't say it's better to be with another person because it's fun, or it's nice to have a friendship or a human connection. He says it's better to be with someone for practical reasons, to fight an intruder or to get warm. So there's still a distance from a community. Like he's being very practical. It's better to be wise, and it's better to have somebody who can help you.
Mm-hmm. To help you, but also
doesn't feel very human.
Or is he saying that it's better to have someone there so you can look after each other? Again, which is a practical thing, but also okay, but to you it still feels it feels utilitarian.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what does he say about wisdom here?
What was your question? What does he say about what?
Wisdom.
Oh, wisdom. Okay.
Well, if you're a poor but wise youth, you have a lot of potential. But if you're an old but foolish king, you don't.
Right. Better, like in this case, wisdom, better to be early in your life and not acquired it yet, right? Because you have the potential, better than to be someone who's old and powerful but never learned anything along the way. Yeah. I like the last part too. So what he's saying here is don't be overeager to go to the house of God, just to go to the temple, basically. More acceptable is obedience than the offering of fools, for they know nothing but to do wrong. So he's saying don't go too often to the temple to like offer a sacrifice. I think so as not to be right, better to be obedient and live your life in a pious kind of way, rather than constantly be going to the temple and offering doves and pigeons and all that. Because it might be kind of silly and I don't know, inappropriate to do that if you keep doing it over and over again. Okay, so here maybe we see that there's a little bit more advice, there's a little bit more concrete things put forward. All right, so now we're starting to get to a little bit of a summary of the things that matter. Somebody else want to read? Merle?
Only this I have found is a real good, that one should eat and drink and get pleasure with all the gains he makes under the sun during the numbered days of life that God has given him, for what is his portion. Also, whenever a man is given riches and property by God, it is also permitted by him to enjoy them and to take his portion and get pleasure from his gains. That is a gift of God. For such a man will not brood much over the days of his life, because God keeps him busy enjoying himself.
All right, so this is a little bit of a pivot from what we've been hearing before. So what's he, because he was saying, what does it matter to enjoy anything? I've had it all. What does it mean? So what's he saying here?
I think it all goes back to an individual's definition of community. How
Hmm.
much do you, how many do you need to keep yourself happy, to give to all the things we've been discussing? I mean, you know, some people might need 4 people, some people might need 200. And what is your definition of what you do with what you have? Whether it's items or whether it's your mind, your wisdom, whatever. I mean, all these things are discussed. I mean, if God gives you all these things, what are you going to do with all these things? And I don't know whether I'm thinking too that things in your mind, if you don't have someone to share them with, whether it's 1, 2, or however many people in your definition of community, the things that you've been given in your mind, in your brain, all depends on who you're with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Susan, you were gonna say something? Susan was gonna say something.
There are
Oh.
so many quotes in here. Did I do unmute? Yeah. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. I mean, it comes right from this, and then enjoy. These are gifts from God. Enjoy them, because if you don't, you're not, in a way, acknowledging God's beneficence. So, these all these quotes, and vanity, vanity, there's nothing new under the sun. We use these as phrases all the time, and it's so great to see that they're coming from this. But yes, you know, at some point there'll be no tomorrow, so enjoy what you have, and
Yeah.
do so with the feeling that these are God's gifts to you. So, and
Yeah,
acknowledge.
and I think that's the key part there, right? Recognizing that this is a gift. It's a gift from God. It's something out of it, to some degree, out of my hands, out of my control. And that's really a central theme of Sukkot, right? Is that gratitude for the joys, the blessings, the harvest, that didn't need to be there. But it is like, let's not, it's, we've all heard like there's people who can have anything that they, as wealthy as you want, can have anything they want in the world. But if there's not gratitude for those things, it's all, it's all vapor. It's all futile, right? Brad, you wanted to say something?
Well, I mean, up until this point, if I'm not mistaken, there's been no mention whatsoever of God. And all of a sudden we have God mentioned 3 times, 4 times in this passage. So there's definitely a shift here in thinking.
There is a little more. I had to cut some of the pieces out, but yes, but God isn't necessary. God is not a central focus of Kohelet. But right, but as soon as you introduce God into it, it's understanding God as sort of like being like the one who brings these good things into our lives, right? But you're right. There's definitely a shift when we understand that. So yeah, Daphne?
I think the last sentence made me think that he's trying to say, stay busy, stay engaged. Like the gift is that you have received property or whatever you've amassed, and the gift is being able to enjoy them. So the pursuit of that enjoyment is what keeps your mind busy. And then you can't brood over the futility of life because you're busy living. So I think the joy and the pleasure comes from living the life.
Yeah. And I think too, and there's definitely some irony there too, from this guy who's clearly spent a whole lot of time brooding, either the irony or the wisdom, right? He's clearly been sitting around for a while, thinking and stewing. And maybe it was a little bit too much. Maybe he spent a little bit too much time just rolling thoughts around in his mind without interacting with others, without having any kind of other feedback coming in. So stay busy, stay active, Don't totally lose track of everything. So why don't we'll read this last paragraph. We're coming short on time. So this is towards the end. So he says, consider God's doing, who can straighten what he has twisted. So in a time of good fortune, enjoy the good fortune, and in a time of misfortune, reflect. The one no less than the other was God's doing, right? I think that's amazing, right? The misfortune and the fortune and misfortune were both God's doing. Consequently, man may find no fault with God. In my own brief span of life, I have seen both these things. Sometimes a good man perishes in spite of his goodness, and sometimes a wicked one endures in spite of his wickedness. So don't overdo goodness, and don't act the wise man to excess, or you may be dumbfounded. Don't overdo wickedness, and don't be a fool, or you may die before your time. It is best that you grasp the one without letting go of the other, for one who fears God will do his duty by both. Wisdom is more of a stronghold to a wise man than 10 magnates that a city may contain. For there is not one good man on earth who does what is best and doesn't err. So what's he saying here?
This is great. Life has its ups and downs, buddy. Be glad when you have good fortune. And it's interesting, the mid-fortune is no less of God's doing. So think about that. You know, it's that we always, no one has everything going right for his or her whole life. So it's kind of also a balance, a homeostatic balance, both good, that there's both good and bad, be in the middle, and don't overdo either your goodness or your wickedness, because that's life.
Mm-hmm. Right? When there's good, enjoy it, appreciate it. And when there's bad, learn from it. Right?
Right.
And he says, I've seen both these things. I've seen good people, bad things happen to good people, and evil people living long, enjoyable lives. And so keep all of this in balance, right? Without too much of the other. And I like where he says there is not one good man on earth who does what is best and doesn't err, right? There's no such thing as a good person who doesn't make mistakes. So keep all of that in balance. And so I think, and so this is part of what he, as he's sort of getting towards the conclusion of what he's trying to talk about is basically that, like, I've seen so much breadth in this world, right? He's seen good, he's seen bad, he's seen enjoyment, he's seen, right, loss, all sorts of things. So what is it that we make of it, all in all? And this is, I think, where he's starting to get to it, right? When there's good, enjoy it. And when there's bad, learn, but move forward. Because you can't control it. And it's going to be fleeting. So if it's going to be fleeting, the bad is going to move, and so is the good. So enjoy it while it's here. So people will debate whether or not Kohelet was he a pessimist or was he an optimist, right? Was he saying it's all for naught? So was he a what's the word? An Epicurean, right? Eat and drink because you might die tomorrow. Or is he saying, because, there's no meaning in anything, or because it's so fleeting, there's meaning in everything. So don't miss the opportunities to learn from misfortune and to appreciate the good. So on Sukkot, this is really a time where we're meant to appreciate the good, right? And we've just spent, Yom Kippur was a week ago. We just spent a whole lot of time looking back on the places where we made mistakes and the places where we need to improve. So reflect on it, learn from it, but then, let's move forward. We can't stay in that forever. So I wish you all a Chag Sameach, a happy, wonderful Sukkot, Shabbat Shalom. I hope I'll see you all soon, but I hope it's a time for community and joy, and gratitude for all the blessings in your life. So thanks y'all for joining today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Shabbat shalom.
This was wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Care.
Great, thanks.